Good morning, St. Peter's. Happy Tuesday to you. Coming to you today from the extra messy office. I still hope one day you're going to see one of these videos and the office is going to be all clean and everything put away with a home and unpacked. But that day is not this day. But happy to be coming to you again for our 5 good minutes, where the point, I always want to stress this, is that we will take what it is we're studying on Sunday, the themes, particularly the scripture, and talk about how can we bring that into our real lives. Remember, the point is not for us to remain completely unchanged, be a hard-hearted people, but tithe on Sundays. I mean, that the point is that in our worship of God and our obedience and following of Jesus, that we would become more like him, that we would be transformed by grace and by his word and by his spirit, so that we can be those who, as Jesus says, if you love me, you'll keep my commands, you'll do what I have said. That's our goal together, following Jesus by his spirit and his grace and becoming more like him. And so for this week, I wanted to talk just briefly, honestly, about anger. On Sunday, we talked about anger and this question God asked Jonah, is it right for you to be angry? And we talked about how James says, you should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because human anger does not bring about the righteousness of God. And yet there's so much anger in our world today. In the case of Jonah, I think he deals with it very poorly. His anger, his sense of self-righteousness and entitlement leads him to a place where he calls the grace of God and the will of God evil because it didn't connect with what he thought was right. And that's a powerful thing. That's a place that we don't want to get to. We want to remember that God's will always goes first in our life, that God's ways are right, and we are those who follow and trust in it. And so if God has mercy on someone, who are we to say, no, you should not do that, God? But again, there's a lot of it out there in the world today. And so what I wanted to do is just talk briefly about anger. One of the most important things I ever learned in my life about anger, and I can be somebody who has anger, was 2 things. One, that anger in itself is not a sin in Scripture, right? It's kind of what anger leads us to do next. We all feel that anger sometimes, but then how do we respond to it? I love the line where it talks about the devil is prowling. He's looking for someone to devour. And that we are supposed to be those who say, no, even in that moment of anger, I will resist that temptation to sin, to allow the devil to just take hold of me, but I'll continue to try to do what is right. So that always helped me. And the other big one was a counselor once told me, anger is almost always a secondary emotion. So there's something that is hurting you. There's something that you feel powerless in or frustrated about, or something that is wounding you, and you don't know how to express that. And so it comes out as this kind of burning anger. And as we continue to walk forward as a church, as we continue to try to be those who have control of our tongues, as those who are healing balm in the world, as those who are forgiving rather than being so judgmental and condemning of others, how are we going to discover that thing underneath? What is that that's causing our anger to burn so strongly? That's causing us to want to get our enemies and make them pay and all that kind of stuff. And try to get to that root emotion. What is it? And then that's what we can bring to God. And we can ask him, how then can I, in my anger, not sin? Maybe it's even a righteous anger, right? There are things that God talks about being righteously angry in, but he does not sin. How do we reflect our Father in that way? I wish we were having Wednesday so we could talk about this more, but if any of you are struggling with anger, if any of you want to talk more about this, I'd love to go deeper. because anger, I think, is a sin that's very common. Well, it's not a sin, but it is an emotion that is very, very common and leads us to all sorts of destructive sins. And so learning how to deal with it in a better way, in a more godly way, I think will be critical for us going forward as followers of Jesus. With that, I want you to know I'm praying for you this week. I'd love to talk more if you have a chance, and I will see you all on Sunday. Thanks so much, church.